I remember my first day of college. I had an 8 a.m. Political Science 101 class with Dr. Steve Whirls. Over the course of the hour, he went over the basic ideas and the thinkers that we would be exploring throughout that semester. And as the hour came to a close, he concluded by saying, political science is shaped by what we believe to be fundamentally true about human beings. What we ultimately think about what it means to be human defines how we shape and order human society. I went from that class to life class, which was a class that studied the Old and New Testaments and their influence upon Western civilization. In that class, Dr. Moreland introduced us to the broader study of religious studies. And he said the study of religion is really an examination of what it means at our core to be human beings. That afternoon, I entered the McCoy Theater for my first acting class with Cookie Ewing. And Cookie, with her snow-white pixie haircut, her squinted eyes, her flowing fabrics, and her voice that sounded like a mystic, whispered to all of us, now, the study of theater is ultimately the study of what it is to be human. So in the course of a first day of college, I'd gone to 3 different classes, all of which said that their subject matter was the study of what it is to be human. I imagine that the biology professor, the history professor, the English teacher, the artist, the engineer, the economist began their classes in a similar way. Each field of study works out of some basic assumptions about what makes us human and then builds out all the other layers of ideas from that core assumption. As far as we know, human beings are the only beings who are able to reflect on their own being status. We're the only ones who can think, is who I am and how I'm living in alignment with who I want to be. Other creatures react just at the cellular and molecular level, just responding to stimuli. You move into some creatures that have instincts to react, predator, prey, fight and flight, things like that. And eventually you get into categories of mammals who have pro-social behaviors with each other. But as far as we know, the chimpanzee does not sit around thinking about what it is to be a chimp. And the dolphins in the sea don't reflect on the overall moral landscape around them. But there's a host of research that it appears that we as human beings are perhaps underdeveloping this unique capacity we have at awareness and reflection. You see it as the study of the humanities at the collegiate level has plummeted in the last decade in favor of other courses of study that are more of workforce preparation, helping you to make it in the real world, we say. Isn't that interesting? That the very concept of the real world is the place of the market and commerce and the making of money and the buying of things. To consider the deep questions of who I am and why I'm living my life this way, that's divorced from life in the real world. And so we see in these studies that among young college graduates, the increased influence that they have of wanting to make money as the number one goal of their life after school. And most of them can't tell you why they want to make money, aside from acquiring the various things, doing the hobbies, going on the adventures, following what other people tell them is worth getting, or what their social media algorithms tell them that they really wish they wanted in life. There's an old New Yorker cartoon that pictures 2 Wall Street bankers out in front of the New York Stock Exchange, and one of them says to the other, "I have discovered the meaning of life, and the meaning of life is to outperform the market." It's a fitting commentary. To fill this need for meaning that we seem to have in us innately, then, we project onto the development of technology a narrative of progress, that through technology, we are moving forward in some direction toward a better future. And there's evidence of that, right? Like medicine and vaccines and things that keep us alive and help to feed the hungry, things like this. But then we also hear reports of technology, particularly right now coming out of artificial intelligence in Silicon Valley. And you hear from the people working the closest with this technology that they're terrified of what it might be able to create. And yet, like the gambling addict at the slot machine who just keeps pulling the lever despite knowing that their life is spiraling into disaster, these folks keep working on this technology even knowing the destruction that it could bring. What it means to be human in relations to our families is changing, shifting, ending. Marriage rates are down. Childbearing numbers are shrinking. We're redefining the obligations we have to the families that we come from in terms of what we have what we owe those who came before us. How can I grow into my truest self if I'm still tethered by name and DNA and common social history to somebody else? Some have come to identify who they are as a human being completely with their political outlook, often identifying with a group that shares a common grievance that needs to be named, and it needs to be confessed, and restitution needs to be brought. And so we find our belonging by that community of grievance, and then we build a high barbed wire fence around it, and we lob our artillery at those outside the fence whose job we proclaim it is to fix the problems that we encounter. Still others have become their work. I read an article this week that major research institutions, Notre Dame, Harvard, University of Chicago, they're developing courses in formation for new retirees. This is for people who've just finished their working life and they don't know who they are anymore. So when they sign up for the course, they're told from the very first day, you've got to throw out your resume and your CV. Those don't matter anymore. Your professional life is over. And there's these stories in the article of people who go through this existential crisis because they don't have any idea who they are now that their life is not defined by their work and their achievement at work. There's also some beautiful stories of transformation through this process. We may come back to those later in this year together. But for now, I want us to think, who are we? That people who have risen to the highest levels, the CEOs of their company, prominent political and academic leaders in our country, who have to take a class in retirement to figure out what in the world it means to be human now. All these examples are vying for our trust, that their story is the one that tells us who we truly are. Is it our consumption? Is it our class, our race, our gender? Is it our nation, our clan, or our tribe? Is it our capacity for novelty and the new? Is it our work and our achievement? Is there some truest self that sits beneath it all? And if I can just get enough freedom, and if I can only have enough autonomy, then we will be able to develop for ourselves the person we always wanted to be based on the definition that we created, utilizing the resources that we chose to ingest. Or could it be that there's a voice that we've pushed out of the conversation? A voice that we've chosen to leave in the past of history where all myth goes to die. A voice that has been pushed out of the conversation with the real world, scientific fact, and class conflict and culture war. A voice that cannot be captured in a report or in a policy statement or in a theorem or in a stump speech. A voice that we've been told is provincial, backward, pre-modern. I'm talking about the voice of the poet, the voice that sings out of the darkness, the one who sung over the watery chaos and created new concepts, light and dark. This voice that creates by speaking and thus has created us, not as creatures of our own devising, but as those who have been created. This is a voice that frees us from having to define ourselves, and thus can tell us who we truly are and calm our anxious hearts. We aren't, in fact, one of a kind. We are made in an image. We are made in the image of God. As Old Testament scholar and longtime professor at Union Seminary in Richmond, Virginia, Elizabeth Ochtemeyer reminds us, friends, apart from God, we do not even know who we are. Do you think that your human personality can be adequately described except in relation to your Maker? Can the psychologist, the sociologist, the economist, the humanist accurately reveal your nature? No. Not if they leave out the fact that you were made to bear within you an image that points to a transcendent glory. This voice speaks through and past all those other voices that would claim us, that would seek to define us and what it means to be human. This voice overwhelms all those voices that tell us that we are something other than human. And so this year at Raleigh Court Presbyterian Church, we are committed to becoming human again. Everything we do in our life, from our worship to our care to our study to our service to others, is going to be directed toward listening to this voice, to being defined by this purpose, the God who creates our reality, the God who creates and sustains our life. We're going to explore what it means to be an embodied person in a time when so much of our life is reduced to what we can put on a text message with our thumbs or our head over a Zoom screen or our digital identities on Instagram and TikTok. We're going to remember what it means to live with our skin on, to know what it is to ache in our bodies, to pay attention to our breath, to curl our toes, to recognize that there's some parts that are just going to sag with age. And we've got to learn to accept some of those problem areas. We're going to explore what it means to live in our bodies, to care for and tend to our bodies, to lament our bodies, all of it. And then we're going to look at what it means to live in our bodies with other people in their bodies, not in a stereotyped relationship of who's out there that we don't actually know, not in relationships of helper and victim, not in relationships of what can I get from you, but in a personal attentiveness to one another, to welcome and invite and embrace, to learn how to listen and wait and hope, to hug and wipe tears and give high fives and pass the bread around the table, to be in our bodies with other people in their bodies who are also made in the image of God and whose lives point us toward a transcendent glory. And we will look at how our bodies live within this creation. As those given this gift of consciousness by God, how do we exercise our responsibility as we care for the soil and the air and the water, as we tend to the plants and the animal life around us? God tells us that to be fully human is to live in an interdependent relationship of care with the earth and with her creatures. How are we living this responsible stewardship with the world God made? And all of this, our bodies, the bodies of others, the created life that we live within, is to draw us into the voice who cries out. Not to live with our ears plugged to the real life struggles and pressures and anxieties, but not to let those struggles and anxieties overwhelm us, but to come to see the world in the way that God sees the world, the one who calls this world we inhabit very good. We're made in the image of God. We are placed on this earth with a purpose to care for and tend to it and to one another. Now, we've fallen away from that call, but it's never the wrong time. It's always the right time to hear that voice and heed that call again. Right now is the best time there's ever been to become part of this church community together. For this very day, we begin a journey, and you're invited to join us as we come to learn what it is to be human again. Amen.